Okay, let's dive into this. Today we're unpacking a truly fascinating text. It's a profound 20th century essay by the brilliant scientist and thinker J.B.S. Haldane called What I Require from Life. It's this deeply personal yet highly political reflection on the exact requirements for a meaningful life, both for us as individuals and for society as a whole. Haldane breaks down his entire worldview into these brilliant logical steps, and we're going to map the whole shebang out today.
So Haldane kicks off his essay with a pretty striking realization. He basically acknowledges that he has to accept the world exactly as it is, rather than demanding some unrealistic imaginary perfection. He reflects on the fact that he was born into an era of quiet, order, and stability. But with the outbreak of World War I in 1914, well, everything changed. He realized right then that he could no longer expect a quiet life. So he resolved instead to make the absolute best use of his time in a completely chaotic world.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how this concept of a heroic age shapes his entire philosophy, because Haldane recognizes that his era is defined by continuous conflict and social turmoil. He doesn't just retreat, instead he adapts. This understanding that a completely peaceful life is basically impossible acts as the bedrock for everything he demands from life. It absolutely forces him to figure out what is truly essential when the world around you is constantly shifting.
Part 1, the individual and the 4 general human needs. We're moving from his macro worldview down to the micro level, looking at his foundational pillars for personal happiness, assuming basic survival needs are already met.
So, assuming you have food, water, and shelter, Haldane identifies 4 specific general human needs. First up, engaging work that's fairly paid. Second, freedom, specifically of speech and choice. Third, health, which he views as having enough fitness to actually work and enjoy life. And fourth, friendship, defined as comradeship among equals. What really stands out here is just how timeless these are, right? I mean, these remain incredibly relatable requirements for a fulfilling life even for us today. Let's zoom in on that first requirement, work. Haldane doesn't see happiness as just kicking back on a beach and doing nothing. Referencing the ancient philosopher Aristotle, he literally defines happiness as unimpeded activity. For Haldane, work is the primary requirement for human happiness. He deeply valued the creative freedom to switch between different active pursuits, things like scientific research, war reporting, or public speaking. He really believed true satisfaction comes from active, purposeful labor, not just passive pleasure. And when it comes to freedom, Haldane specifically demands greater freedom of speech. He demands the right to openly tell the truth about powerful individuals, sensationalist media, and harmful commercial products. He wants to call out bad journalism or fake medicines without any hesitation. He heavily criticized the restrictive libel laws of his time for protecting private corporate interests and essentially gagging people from exposing dangerous or dishonest practices to the public. And this brilliantly illustrates his fourth need, friendship. Haldane stresses that true friendship requires a relationship between equals. Why? Well, because true comradeship demands open, mutual criticism, completely free from weird power dynamics. He argues that strict hierarchies and extreme wealth disparities actually destroy genuine human connections. You just cannot have true friendship if one person holds immense economic power over the other. It doesn't work.
Throughout all of this, Haldane makes a really vital distinction between a demand and a desire. Demands are the absolute essential requirements for human well-being, the work, the freedom, the health, and the equality we just talked about. Desires, on the other hand, those are the non-essential comforts. He totally admits he enjoys things like a private room with books, a motor car, or taking a daily bath, but he considers these strictly optional. He doesn't rely on luxurious amenities to find personal contentment.
Beyond those basic needs, Haldane personally requires one more thing, and that is adventure. But his scientific background heavily influences how he defines it. He contrasts what he calls solid adventure with fleeting thrills. True adventure isn't about cheap emotional highs or doing dangerous stunts like motor racing. For him, a real adventure has to serve a useful scientific or social purpose, and he wasn't kidding about this. Haldane was famous for testing dangerous gases and decompression chambers on himself. To him, that was solid adventure, not just some cheap thrill.
Part 2, Society, and a vision for collective security. Let's move to and see how this builds into his realization that individual happiness is impossible while the majority suffers.
Haldane acknowledges that while he considers himself fortunate, he can't be truly happy while the majority of society suffers under unfair conditions. Individual happiness, in his view, is deeply linked to collective well-being. This empathy leads to a sharp historical critique of economic systems. He identifies capitalism as a system that inherently causes systemic unemployment and prioritizes generating private profit for owners. Instead, he advocates for a socialist system. In his view, socialism ensures that workers reap the direct benefits of their own labor, enhancing their own well-being rather than generating wealth for others, and organizes society around actually meeting collective human needs.
Based on that socialist framework, he outlines a few specific societal demands. He calls for industrial democracy, where workers actually control their own conditions, arguing that freedom should begin in the workshop. Makes sense, right? He also demands universal access to food, housing, and modern healthcare. Furthermore, he promotes widespread education driven by science and the complete abolition of class distinctions and gender subjection, which he believed could be achieved through an economic revolution.
Now, you might notice that peace is missing from his list of primary demands. Haldane explains this by looking at the harsh reality of the 1930s and 40s. He recognizes that demanding immediate peace is entirely futile while totalitarians like Hitler and Mussolini are actively threatening global security. He takes a very realist stance here. War is inevitable, and true peace simply cannot exist until aggressive fascism is completely eliminated.
Part 3. The End. Requirements for a Dignified Death. Let's take a moment here to lower the energy slightly and transition into his final, more contemplative reflections on mortality.
Finally, after laying out his requirements for a fulfilling life and the just society, Haldane turns his attention to his own eventual passing. To define a good death, he actually grounds his modern scientific views in ancient philosophy. He points to the ancient Greek philosopher Socrates as his ultimate model for an honorable death. By citing Socrates, he highlights the timeless importance of intellectual integrity and facing the end of life without any fear.
Haldane notes 4 specific conditions that Socrates met in his final days. 1. Socrates died for his beliefs. 2. He remained mentally sharp until the age of 70. 3. He fully completed his life's work. And 4. Incredibly, he faced death with good humor. Haldane writes that he hopes to fulfill at least 2 of these conditions when his own time inevitably comes.
So the crucial point is that ultimately, Haldane wants to leave behind a completed legacy. He desires to face death with dignity, purpose, and total conviction. He wants an end that evokes respect for a life fully utilized, rather than pity.
JBS Haldane provided an incredibly structured, thoughtful framework for exactly what he needed to make his time on Earth meaningful, from fulfilling work and true friendship, all the way to societal equity and a dignified end. But this explainer wouldn't be complete without turning that same lens onto you. When you look past the fleeting thrills and the optional desires, what do you truly require from your life to be happy and satisfied? It's like a giant puzzle we all have to solve. Think about it. Thanks for joining me to explore this fascinating essay.